To Law Line with your host, Alan Schnorman. Mr. Schnorman is a distinguished trial attorney, author, and lecturer. Each week, Law Line will bring you the most knowledgeable experts in the field of law today. And now we introduce our guest and our host, Alan Schnorman.
Welcome to Law Line. The senseless rape and assault of the Central Park jogger horrified a nation already immune to violence. The grisly details of the attack received widespread media coverage. Today we'll get an insight into the jury deliberation, media coverage, and a view from the bench on the media coverage. Our guests are the Honorable Frederick Berman, Acting State Supreme Court Justice and an Adjunct Professor of Law at New York Law School. Timothy Sullivan, former editor of Manhattan Lawyer and a producer of the American Courtroom Network. And Harold Breland, one of the jurors in the Central Park jogger case. Hello, Judge Berman. Hello, Harold. Hello, Timothy. Harold, I'm going to ask you the first question. Bring us into the courtroom. Bring us into the deliberation process. What comes out? What stands out in your mind as part of this process?
Well, a lot of hard work. I mean, I guess it's an ordeal that you don't want to have to go through very often. That's what I guess stands out in my mind most immediately when I think about the deliberation process. The hearing of the testimony is quite another matter. That's a very compelling, almost entertaining experience compared to the deliberations.
Well, what do you think of the whole process as a whole?
Oh, it's very fascinating. It's a whole precious tradition that we've got in our civilization, which I was very privileged to have a front seat to view.
Harold, what took so long in the deliberations? How many days was it?
10 days, 10 big days, yes. Well, I think a lot of the time that took in the deliberations was a matter of convincing people who had been inattentive or not careful in their hearing of the testimony and instruction of the law, and thereby had to be re-educated or re-informed on what had taken place.
Did you find yourself actually becoming an advocate of a certain position?
Oh, many times, certainly. Yes, I had. Sometimes I had to advocate a certain interpretation of what I felt the judge had instructed us to do. Sometimes I felt I had to advocate a certain interpretation of the testimony. Sometimes I had to advocate a certain verdict.
Now, Harold, I've seen your picture in the paper many times with artists drawing your pictures right on the page number 3. How did you feel about the media being right in the courtroom, artists in the first row? How did it affect you as a juror?
Eventually you learn to tune it out. Eventually you learn to remember that that's just something that is not important right now, that you must put that aside and you must concentrate on the testimony completely. At first, of course, there are moments when in between testimonies being given, there's bench conferences going on, there's pauses in the proceedings. Then you look and you see, oh, who's out there with their binoculars trained on me right now? And you know,
And do I have the right tie on?
Right. Well, none of us wore ties.
Okay. Well, Tim, you were in the media. You were in the courtroom almost every day. What was your perception of what was going on?
Well, I guess from my personal point of view, covering a trial like this, there's so much going on that I found myself constantly busy watching the jurors, watching the judge, watching the lawyers, watching the defendants, watching my fellow reporters. Because I was writing for a monthly magazine and not for a daily newspaper, I didn't have to run out with what's the news of the day and turn a story around quickly. So I had time to observe a lot more detail about
Now, you were sitting in the courtroom day after day. Were you reaching conclusions as to a verdict also, you personally?
Well, I try not to reach conclusions about a verdict. I tried to be careful about that. But I was paying very close attention to the evidence. And of course, being in the media and having access to some of the things that the jurors don't have access to, I kind of wonder about what kind of effect those things might have had.
How did you feel about the opinion that barred cameras from that courtroom?
Well, I believe that cameras should be permitted at trials, and my organization, we had an application in with the rest of the media in New York
To televise
to televise the trial. And so we were disappointed when Judge Galligan decided not to permit that.
Do you feel they were wrong?
Well, personally, I think that that we could have had the cameras in there, we could have televised it, and I do not think it would have had a bad effect on the trial. But I understand the judge. I read his opinion, and I understand his point of view.
Let's get an opinion now from the bench. What do you think of having cameras in a trial, not the Central Park Jogger trial, but a case like that?
Sure, let me answer that generally, because I'm not permitted as a sitting judge to comment on a pending case.
And we're not asking
you to. The Jogger case is still pending. But in general, I think most judges are in favor of cameras in the courtroom. I know I am. I think it's important for the public and the press to have the opportunity to see what's going on. But having said that, the judge has competing problems that he has to deal with. For example, he has to be sure that the trial is going to be conducted in a fashion that follows the rules without obstruction so that both sides get a fair trial. And from a judge's point of view, sometimes the cameras can, in a particular case, cause problems that will prevent that objective, a fair trial to both sides.
Well, Harold, you were a juror on this case. You were juror number 7. If there was cameras in the courtroom, if there was a camera on each and every witness, if there was one camera on the judge, and I believe what they do is they bring one camera into the courtroom.
Normally.
How, as you as a juror, would that affect the way you decided the case?
No, I don't think so. I'm not sure, but I mean, we knew that there was a lot of attention. I mean, we could see that there was 3 rows of or benches of the courtroom were filled up with very important reporters. We knew that we were being scrutinized worldwide. If there had been cameras there, it wouldn't have really made it any more intense than it already was. It was already very intense. We knew it. We were being looked at.
Harold, you use the expression you were scrutinized worldwide. It sounds to me that certainly that would come into somewhat play on your actions. Did it at all?
No. I was quite content to come out of this courtroom with either verdict. I said I could be proud to come out of here with a not guilty verdict, or I could become proud to come out of here with a guilty verdict.
What about the other jurors? Do you think the media affected them?
No, I don't think so. I think that was never came out in the deliberations. The only time I felt there was something of a scrutiny that was inappropriate was we will look stupid in the eyes of the judge. There was occasionally the feeling that we might somehow incur the disfavor of Judge Galligan by asking something that was inappropriate or unintelligible. Because you know that from time to time a jury does send notes out of the deliberating process. And we were worried that sometimes he might not look upon our request kindly. And that was probably the only time that this element of scrutiny was...
Because the media was there, and of course...
Not the media.
You would be judged.
No, it was sort of a personal thing. I think we had developed a certain kind of relationship, unspoken, with Judge Galligan. He was so awesome and so capable as a judge that we somehow wanted to do everything right in his eyes. But the media was not a factor.
We're going to continue with this conversation. We have to take a break now.
Okay.
Right after the break. You're watching Lawline. Stay with us.
There's a reason people whisper when they tell you a rumor. It's because 9 times out of 10, it's not true. Take all the rumors about AIDS. People are saying you can catch AIDS from a mosquito bite or in swimming pools. The fact is, there isn't a single case of AIDS on record caused by casual contact. It's up to you. You can believe the rumors, or you can get the facts.
Rumors are spreading faster than AIDS. Call your local Red Cross for the facts.
The party's over. All over, one for the road. All over for the 25,000 Americans who die each year as the result of drivers who drink. Drivers who don't realize how little it takes to turn the average social drinker into a tragedy. So please take this advice from this station and the members of the New York State Bar Association. When in doubt, don't start out.
And now a word from the American Lung Association. Your lungs are an incredible piece of machinery, but your lungs are also incredibly delicate. Diseases of the lung are among the most frequent causes of suffering, disability, and death in the United States. Lung cancer is now the #1 cancer killer in America among both men and women. Chronic bronchitis and emphysema are marked by chronic obstruction to the airflow. Among chronic diseases, asthma is the leading cause of school absenteeism. Yes, TB is still with us. In the past year, over 22,000 Americans have contracted TB. Lung trouble can come from the air you breathe at work, but thanks to the American Lung Association, you can breathe a little easier. They're working to fight all this lung disease. Your lungs are a miracle. Take care of your lungs. They're only human. And if my lungs weren't in great shape, I couldn't have said all this. The American Lung Association. The Christmas seal people.
Hello, you're watching Lawline. I'm Alan Schnorman, your host. Today we're discussing the Central Park Jogger case and media coverage of it. We're privileged to have Judge Frederick Berman with us, Tim Sullivan from the Manhattan Lawyer, formerly editor, and we have juror number 7, Mr. Bruland, Harold Bruland, from the trial, who actually rendered the verdict. Judge, you were telling us before, during the break, on the actual limitations of a camera in a courtroom. What were they?
Oh yes, there are some very specific limitations. In fact, we have to keep in mind that the use of cameras in the courtroom is a legislative act that was passed by the legislature. It's not permissive in the sense that you can do anything you want with cameras. For example, the camera may never be used to show the faces of jurors at any time during the course of the trial, either when they're selected, during the trial, when they're leaving, going in and out of the courtroom. That's an absolute no-no. You may not show the face of a victim of a sex crime in order to protect her identity. You may not show the face of a young child if a young child is a witness in the case. Should there be a police officer who does undercover work, you may not show his face because you obviously could jeopardize his very life if his identity became known to the public. So yes, there are these very specific provisions that bar the use of cameras for those particular purposes.
Judge Berman, I'd like to go back to what Harold had said before. He had said there was a certain relationship established between the 12 jurors, and I assume the alternates, and the judge, and a relationship that they felt obviously was very important to them, and they were a little concerned that the questions they asked might not be of the highest caliber or would be questioned by the judge. Now, does that hinder the system when a jury actually feels that the judge is placed on such an ivory tower like that?
Well, it's hard for me. I would have to speculate on that.
And that's what we're asking for.
I know that in my cases, jurors do not hesitate to send me notes where they have a question about law, about facts. They even sometimes raise questions that cause me and the lawyers to have to spend a considerable period of time trying to fashion out a proper and intelligent response, so that I have not found that jurors are at all inhibited in sending a note out to a judge during the course of deliberations.
Tim, you watched the trial. What do you think of Judge Gallagher?
Well, I think he's a good judge. He's a tough judge. I think Harold's point is well taken, is that he is, Harold described him as awesome. He's a very commanding presence. He's very tough. He's very quick. He makes decisions on his feet. He rules from the bench on every objection almost immediately. He doesn't take a lot of time to think about whether, what am I supposed to do with this objection? I don't have to call a recess and go back and look up the law. He just makes a decision right away. And I think that's partially why he was on this case.
Well, he was selected to be on this case, was he not?
He was, yeah. He was chosen by the OCA top...
Office of Court Administration.
Right, the top administrators there
Tim,
to handle this case.
What's your opinion on the Office of Court Administrator, the administrators actually selecting a judge to try a particular case as opposed to a random selection?
Well, it's an issue that's caused a lot of debate in the last couple of years, mostly since the Robert Chambers trial and then the Steinberg trial came up.
And the Bensonhurst trial in Brooklyn?
The Bensonhurst trial, Judge Owen was chosen for that case. It is clear that in the law, the OCA administrators have the prerogative to bypass the random selection process that's normally used and choose a judge who they specifically want on this case. They have the right to do that. And they do that in cases in which they see that, A, there will be a lot of media attention and a lot of public attention, and B, I think, and that they will say.
But what's
They
your
make no
opinion
qualms
on
about
it?
it. I think it makes sense to do that in some cases.
What about this case?
I don't think it was a bad idea in this case to select a specific judge rather than leave it to the random process. I think it was a good idea. Now, whether Galligan was the right judge is something that perhaps will be decided on appeal.
Judge Berman, how do you feel about that?
About the question of a judge being selected?
A selected judge as opposed to what normally happens, a wheel and a random selection of a judge for a particular case.
I agree with Tim. I think that in a special case where there's going to be a lot of perhaps difficult questions, controlling a courtroom, I see no reason why the administrative judges should not do what they are authorized to do, and that is select a judge that they feel can handle that case. Better to have that done than for a judge to be assigned who's going to lose control of his courtroom.
Harold, in the case that you were the juror on,
Right.
Central Park Jogger, one of the defendants, Yusuf Salman, actually took the stand. What did you think of that? Did that hurt his case? Did it help his
No,
case?
no. At that point, the case was probably as good as lost already. It didn't really hurt anything, in my opinion. Others said it was a stupid thing to do, but I think at worst it was an embarrassing move, maybe to him and to his lawyer. But it did not lose his case. It was already pretty much a lost case at that point, in my mind. It was an interesting move, but and I think Burns has to be congratulated on taking the chance because he had nothing to lose at that point. Why not attempt something like that? In my opinion, it was not a bad move.
What did you think of the quality of the lawyers?
I thought Joseph's was an especially astute one. He wasted no time. He knew what he wanted to accomplish. His defense was very focused. He had a certain vision of what he wanted us to come out of this testimony believing, and thereby came the closest of any of the defense lawyers in
What about the other two?
The other two were more diffused in their approach to it. They were just, seemed to me, taking a shotgun approach at discrediting anything that the prosecution had to present, and thereby not focusing their defense and giving us a clear definition of what it was that we were to believe.
There's been a lot of criticism of the cross-examination. What do you think of that?
Whose cross-examination?
Cross-examination of one of the parties?
Yeah, I think you mean by Robert Burns' cross-examination of Detective McKenna, who testified against Salam.
You know, I don't have as clear of notion of how that went as some others have been able to recollect. Timothy was able to produce some recollections about that I don't even recall. Now it comes to me that, yes, when Burns was cross-examining McKenna, he introduced evidence that he thought would discredit McKenna's testimony, and in fact ended up corroborating it.
Harold, the evidence is the evidence, and a trial is a search for the truth. How important is it to have a great lawyer? I mean, how important is that, just from your perspective?
Oh, I think it's very important to have a great lawyer, and I think that each side should have a great lawyer, and it's important, sure. In order to uncover all that needs to be uncovered so that the jury has a chance to see all aspects of the case and come to a fair verdict.
But isn't the truth and the evidence out there for the jury to see and evaluate?
Well, jurors are only human, and they can easily forget to look at certain points if they're not reminded to look at. And if they're not reminded to have the reasonable doubt, they may not come to it. And the defense lawyer must do that.
Tim, regarding the media, sometimes you see a witness comes out of the courtroom and the media, or an attorney in the media gathers around almost in a circus atmosphere. What's your opinion on that?
Well, I think it's, the press has long been described as a pack, and that's pack journalism. And in a case like this, I think you get pack journalism at its worst. I think there were some instances of good journalism done during this case, but there were also instances, particularly pre-trial, in which some people went too far, some papers went too far, and these defendants may make some sense when they claim they didn't get a fair shake from the media going in. Doesn't mean they didn't get a fair trial.
Judge, we're going to go to a break now, but I'd like you to think of the following question. What do you think of an attorney who gives press conferences during trial from the courthouse steps? I'm Alan Schnorman, your host. You're watching Lawline. Stay with us.
My father taught me to steal and to pitch. Today I struck out 7 and stole home. I think Dad would have been proud. Coach was. He said he wished Dad had taken as good care of himself as he did of me and Billy. Billy won't talk about it, and Mom can't stop crying. I don't know what it's like to have a heart attack, except I can see it hurts. It hurts bad.
You can help prevent heart disease. We can tell you how.
My father, Gordon McRae, was one of the biggest stars in musicals. He was also an alcoholic. When I was little, I thought I could stop my dad from drinking. But only the alcoholic can do that. And finally, my father got help and stayed sober the last 7 years of his life. I was so proud of him. Alcoholism is treatable and preventable. Be alert to signs that you might need help, especially if you're the child of an alcoholic. For information, call the National Council on Alcoholism, 1-800-NCA-CALL.
Talking computers. High-speed Braille printers. New technology helping blind and visually impaired people participate fully in today's computer age.
Gather moving the top of page.
For more information about putting high technology to work for blind people, write American Foundation for the Blind, National Technology Center, Box 111, New York, New York, 10011. The American Foundation for the Blind.
Hello, you're watching Lawline. My name is Alan Schnorman, your host, and today we're discussing the Central Park Jogger case and what effect the media has had on it. With us, we have Judge Berman of the Supreme Court. We have Timothy Sullivan of Manhattan Lawyer, former editor, and we have Harold Bruland, juror number 7 in the Central Park Jogger case. Now, Judge, before the break, I had asked you what you thought of attorneys giving press conferences during the trial from the courthouse steps.
I think it's a very dangerous practice because often an attorney, in his exuberance, will make a statement about the case that would introduce, in effect, evidence that would not be permitted into the courtroom. And consequently, he could either damage his own case or have, if it's a prosecutor giving that press conference, he could make a statement that could adversely affect the defendant's right to get a fair trial. So that I think it's wrong for defense attorneys and prosecutors to comment on cases outside of that which they do in the courtroom itself.
Well, Tim, you're from the media. The media wants those statements. How do you feel about that?
Well, I'd like to ask the judge one question on that, though. Judge, if these press conferences, which I value, being a reporter, if these happen during a trial, though, if the jury follows the admonition that they are not to read press accounts of the case, then I don't see the danger. Or do you think that perhaps jurors don't always follow that rule strictly?
Well, I think we hope that jurors follow that rule,
yeah.
But I think the realities are that there are going to be situations where a juror is going to see a newspaper account
or a headline,
or turn on the 11 o'clock news and perhaps not deliberately do it, and he may see something in a press conference that could completely distort his ability to render an impartial verdict. And that's what I see as the danger to having these press conferences outside the courtroom.
Harold, can you see that happening as a juror?
Oh, indeed. People do watch television. They didn't stop watching television until they went into deliberations, and headlines were seen. It was impossible not to see headlines. So there is that element of pressure, of contamination.
Was it ever discussed, Harold, where in the jury room did jurors ever say, well, I saw on the news last night about the case or something?
No, I never heard anyone admit that. I think they would have been, they may have, but they would have been very embarrassed to say it out loud in a jury room, because there was, most of us there, I think, were of the opinion that, no, you absolutely do not read anything, you're not supposed to.
Well, I'd like to ask Tim a question, if I may. You know, in England, there can be no statements outside of the court. In fact, it's a criminal offense if a lawyer makes a statement outside of the court. And certainly the English system is one that permits only what takes place in the courtroom to be reported in the papers, and not in an inflammatory fashion. Now, obviously, our system here is not quite the same,
Right.
and there are those who feel that we might get a better result if we follow the basic English system of confining ourselves to just what is heard in the courtroom and having the press commenting only on what is heard in the courtroom.
Judge, I'd like to comment and ask some questions about the tenor of the time here in our metropolitan New York area. You cannot open a newspaper or turn on the TV screen today without hearing horrible things, whether it's a tourist from Utah being killed on our subway platforms or an assistant district attorney in the Bronx being shot because he went to buy coffee. What's your perception from the bench what's happening here in our city?
Well, there's no question that we're being hit with a tremendous increase in crime, primarily due to the acceleration of the use of crack cocaine, accelerated by the use of people possessing guns illegally, and we are drowning literally in cases. Our caseloads are much greater than they've ever been. We're short of judges, and we're short of police, as we know. We're short of correction space. It's a very serious problem, and I think the administration, both on the city and state level, are properly concerned about it, and we've got to do something to turn this around.
Well, is the answer bringing 5,000 more police into the city system?
Well, I think that that may serve as a deterrent to a certain extent. But remember, if you have 5,000 more police, they're going to make X number of increased arrests. And if without the additional courtrooms and the judges and the correction facilities, what are you going to do with those arrests?
Well, just this year alone, there was talk of reducing the judicial budget, not increasing it, and that was overcome, but next year may very well be reduced.
Oh, no, it was reduced this year. The judiciary has always been a stepchild in the legislative process with respect to the three separate branches of government. The executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judiciary. The judicial branch always gets a short shrift on funds allocated to it.
Judge, I know you've been in public life most of your life. If you had the power to help the system, to change the system, what would you recommend to pull us out from where we're headed?
Alan, I wish I had the answer. If I had the answer to that question, I suspect I would be one who would get the Nobel Peace Prize.
I understand, but what's your best perception?
Well, I think that we've got to do more to have a message sent out to people that there are other aspirations that they should have in order to have success in life, and that being the crack dealer on the block and making the money from drugs and having turf wars is not the answer that's going to make our society any better in the future. We're losing a generation of people because a lot of youngsters are dropping out of schools, not getting an education, and going out and selling crack at age 14 and 15.
Judge Harold Berman of the Frederick Berman, I'm sorry. You know, it's the tension of being on TV. Frederick Berman of the Supreme Court Criminal Branch, thank you very much for appearing on Lawline. Harold Bruland from the Central Park Jogger Juror, thank you very much for appearing on Lawline. And Tim Sullivan, formerly the editor of Manhattan Lawyer and from the media, thank you all for appearing on Lawline. And I apologize about the mispronunciation of your
thank you,
name.
Alan. It's nice to be back.
Okay, and as always, thank you for watching Lawline.
You have been watching Lawline with your host, New York trial attorney, author and lecturer, Alan Schnorman. Mr. Schnorman will be back with you next week at the same time. If you have any questions or comments about this week's program, please write to Lawline, 27th floor, 63 Wall Street, New York, New York, 10005.